2 a.m., and I'm alone in the cramped office my wife and I share, gripping her iPhone, the one she never lets out of her sight. The only time she's not holding it is when she's asleep. So I waited for my moment. Why am I doing this? Am I being paranoid? How could I even think about doubting my own wife? It's my job. As a lawyer, I see lies everywhere. It started with small things. A phone call she abruptly ended as soon as I stepped into the kitchen. A few days later, I asked to borrow her phone to order pizza. She hesitated before handing it over, acting like it was no big deal. But I knew better. The call history and messages were wiped clean. That wasn't normal. That was intentional. What is she hiding? I need to find out. Most people don't realize how vulnerable their phones are. If you think landlines were easy to tap, smartphones are even easier to access. Don't believe me? Look it up. I even bought a quick read ebook on hacking. iPhones can be jailbroken, stripped of their security. Our daughters, smart as they are, cracked their mom's phone the day she got it. Now, sitting here with her phone and a connection cable in my hands, I pause. Am I really going to do this? Do I even want to know the truth? One wrong move, one uncovered secret, and everything could fall apart. 19 years of marriage, a life we built together. A marriage that, for the most part, has been solid. Doris has always been there for me, always put family first. She never asks for much. I didn't marry for love, but I never regretted marrying her. I met Doris at a Sigma Chi party. People assume fraternities are all about privilege and status, but ours was different. It wasn't about money, it was about brotherhood. We took in all kinds, athletes, nerds, outsiders, scholars, as long as they were good people. Back then, I was in my second year of law school, mostly disconnected from campus life. That night, though, I had to supervise the freshman mixer, and that's when Doris walked in with her friends. I recognized her instantly. She was the daughter of my mother's best friend, though I hadn't seen her in years. She was different now, grown, confident, nothing like the lanky kid I remembered. I had to say hello. She was high, maybe drunk, hopefully just dope. "David," she squealed, throwing her arms around me before planting a bold, possessive kiss, like she was staking a claim. She had always been outgoing, but tonight she was turning it up, showing off, making it clear that she had the attention of the older guy, the frat member, the one in charge of the event. I stuck around, kept an eye on her, and made sure her group got home safely. Somewhere in the mix, she decided we were something. We started seeing each other casually, nothing serious. She was a freshman. I was nearly done with law school. Then she broke it off. "I want to see other people," she told me. I acted like I didn't care. But later I realized how much I missed her. Doris wasn't traditionally beautiful, but she had a presence, a kind of energy that filled the room. Without her, things felt quieter, dimmer. I was reserved, logical. She was electric, impossible to ignore. Then summer rolled around. I needed legal experience, and while my classmates fought for jobs at prestigious firms in big cities, I took a position at a small practice in our college town. Housing was tricky, but the university offered me a dorm in exchange for supervising summer students. Doris was on campus too, taking summer courses. I avoided her until she stopped me in the hallway. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "Us. The mistake I made." She regretted ending things. She wanted another chance. I wasn't sure, but I agreed, cautiously. Doris, though, was all in. Her birthday was August 15th. She turned 18 that summer. When I asked what she wanted, she didn't even pause. "I want you to make love to me. I want you to be my first." I was caught off guard. I wasn't sure I was ready for that kind of responsibility. I told her so. She wouldn't take no for an answer. That Saturday, she was volunteering at a women's shelter. I was supposed to pick her up at 4 p.m. at the student union. She showed up in jeans, a Now t-shirt, and an overnight bag slung over her shoulder. We lived in the same building. Why the bag? Then she spotted me. She smiled, walked straight up, kissed me, right there, in front of everyone. It wasn't just affection, it was a statement, a declaration. She wanted people to know exactly what was about to happen. We walked back to my dorm in silence. I lit candles, opened a bottle of White Star champagne. She was nervous, so was I. I wasn't some player. I'd only been with 2 women before, and those experiences were brief. But Doris had expectations. We drank. Slowly, I undressed her, tracing my hands and lips over her skin. When she was ready, I stripped down too, tossing my shorts aside. She giggled. Then she amazed me. Being with Doris changed everything. She was fearless, uninhibited, and completely present in the moment. She craved closeness in a way I'd never experienced before. With her, it wasn't just frequent, it was exhilarating. And she made sure I always wanted more. Over time, Zex became just one part of what we had. We became a real couple. Looking back, I should have seen the signs, but by then, I was already too far gone. I was in love. Doris knew it, and she learned how to use our connection to keep me close. I became an extension of her, a possession she wore proudly, making sure everyone knew we were together. I had never been in a real relationship before. I liked belonging to someone. Eventually, she decided it was time for me to meet her family, her parents, Margaret and Lawrence Boswell, her younger sister, Marianne, and her little brother, Larry Jr. The Boswells were well off. Her father, Larry Sr., was a senior VP at Chaumont National Bank. Her mother, Margaret, taught at the community college. They were well-mannered, polished, the kind of people who made you feel welcome while quietly assessing your worth. They treated me like royalty, especially since I was a third-year law student with a promising future. Margaret had known my mother since high school. While my mom pursued nursing, Margaret had gone into academia. She was striking, statuesque, and carried herself with the kind of elegance that made people take notice. At 40, she barely looked 35. Her husband, though distinguished, had begun to show his age. At 45, he already had a tiredness in his face. Their 16-year-old daughter, Marianne, had inherited her mother's poise and striking features. And then there was 11-year-old Larry, already tall and athletic. He and I clicked instantly. Over time, he became more than just my girlfriend's little brother. He became my best friend. Long before we ever became a couple, my family had already embraced Doris. She was practically part of our household, welcomed as if she belonged. Even my younger sister Paula idolized her. Unlike the Boswells, we weren't well off. My father, David Sanner, co-owned a family-run equipment rental business with my Uncle John. While my uncle had a rigid approach and wasn't particularly sharp, my father was the real reason the business thrived. His ability to connect with people made all the difference. Money was always a concern. My mother, Agnes, worked as a nurse to help support us. She was tall, blonde, and undeniably beautiful. Though, by then, her hairdresser played a role in keeping it that way. She had worked night shifts for as long as I could remember, and had eventually worked her way up to head nurse at the hospital. In the end, she made just as much as my father, if not more. My relationship with my dad was more complicated. He was outgoing, always encouraging me to step outside my comfort zone. "Pick your battles," he'd say. "Avoid a fight if you can, but don't be afraid to stand your ground." We often saw things differently, but one thing was certain: he approved of Doris. "She's the one for you," he told me. "She's got the brains and the looks, just like her mother." Growing up, my favorite nights were the ones when my mom worked the late shift from 4 p.m. to midnight. On Fridays and Saturdays, Dad would let me stay up late. He'd pick her up while I looked after my siblings, and when they got home, they'd bring burgers and milkshakes. Sometimes, though, she came home alone, much later than usual. I'd wake up to the sound of the shower running, hushed voices in their bedroom, my mother's soft laughter, then the familiar creaking of their bed. Even when money was tight and my mother took on extra shifts, there was love in our home. Our families were deeply intertwined. My mother and Doris's mother were practically inseparable. Everyone assumed our relationship was leading to marriage. My mother made it clear. "She's an incredible girl, Davy. Don't screw this up. We're all waiting for the wedding." She loved me, but in her eyes, I was still a kid. And maybe when it came to Doris, I was. I liked how things were, easy, uncomplicated, no pressure. But Doris had other plans. In September, she moved in. I was in my final year of law school trying to stay focused, but she insisted we live together. It stretched my finances thin, but she wasn't worried. A few subtle hints to her mother, and her allowance was increased. With that, expectations changed. Our relationship had to be serious. By May, marriage wasn't a question of if, but when. One night, frustration creeping into her voice, she asked, "What are you waiting for?" To her, it was simple. I had been her first, which, in her mind, meant I owed her commitment. The irony? It had been her decision. But to her, that didn't change the facts. I was weeks away from graduation, about to step into a promising legal career, a prime catch for any woman. Doris, still finishing school, wasn't about to be left behind. She had invested too much, played her cards too well. Doris always saw life through the lens of, what's good for me is good for us. And the worst part, she was right. More often than not, her instincts were better than mine. She pushed me forward, made me stronger. With her, I felt like the best version of myself. So if she wanted a ring before I left college, why was I hesitating? It wasn't that I didn't love her. I did. Being with her was effortless. She made my life brighter, kept me locked in a cycle of passion and comfort. With her in my bed, I had no interest in anyone else. I know men who can't pass a beautiful woman without wondering what she's like in bed. With Doris, that thought never crossed my mind. I had everything I wanted. But forever, I wasn't ready. I made excuses. She was too young, only 18, while I was approaching 25. It was a logical argument, but not an entirely honest one. My mother saw right through it. Doris is more mature than you, she said flatly. I was 17 when I married your father. It's not about age. It's about whether you're ready to be a man. And the fact that you're hesitating after living with her like a married couple proves you're not. She wanted me to grow up. I wasn't sure I was ready. She's only 18, I said. What if she wakes up one day and realizes she missed out on being young? You're the one afraid of missing out, my mother countered. You're going to get your law degree, start your career, and leave her behind. She wasn't wrong. In the end, Doris had too much influence and too many people backing her up. I gave in. A week after passing the bar exam, we got married. I never had a bachelor party. I barely had time for one. I was pulling 20-hour study sessions for the New York bar, one of the toughest in the country. Even Harvard grads only had a 41% pass rate. By the time my results came in, Doris was 3 months pregnant. Officially, it was an accident. But anyone who believed that was naive. Doris had secured her place. 3 days before my bar results were released, we found out we were having twins. I was already on edge, waiting to find out if I had passed. My job at the firm, where I had interned during the summer Doris and I got together, depended on it. Failing meant losing everything. Passing meant a salary increase we desperately needed. But even with that, money was tight. I worked 60-hour weeks just to afford diapers. Doris didn't let pregnancy or finances slow her down. She took her last final of junior year an hour before her water broke. 5 hours later, without a single complaint, she gave birth to 2 perfect, identical baby girls. For me, it was love at first sight. 18 years later, I still love them, but not in the same way. Those first few years were a struggle. Money was tight, and our apartment felt smaller by the day. But Doris never complained. Fatherhood was a mix of wonder and fear. I'll always remember tucking them in at night, reading Make Way for Ducklings, Charlotte's Web, and Anne of Green Gables. They were my little world, believing I could solve any problem, make the rain stop just by smiling. Life wasn't easy, but their hugs, their laughter, it made every hardship worth it. But not every day was filled with bedtime stories and warmth. The night both girls were rushed to the hospital with pneumonia, I crumbled. Doris didn't. She took my face in her hands and forced me to meet her gaze. "David, listen to me," she said firmly. "They're going to be fine. Believe that. And no matter what happens, I will always love and stand by you." In those early years, she was the foundation that held our marriage together. I don't know if I could have done it without her. I wanted to give her everything. I wanted to succeed. For her, for them. Before marriage and kids, ambition had never been my strong suit. If I'm being honest, I'd been lazy. But love, responsibility, fatherhood, they changed me. They made me relentless. And to get ahead, I made sacrifices. Breaking into law wasn't easy. Long hours, high stress, little immediate payoff. I had to be smarter than the competition, use every loophole, find every angle. At home, Doris and the twins, Patricia and Elizabeth, or Pat and Beth, made it all worth it. Doris took night classes while I handled bedtime. I was exhausted, but I was happy. By the time the girls started kindergarten, she had earned her PhD. She started teaching at a community college, then within 3 years landed a full professorship specializing in Shakespeare studies. Her salary helped, but by then it didn't matter. I had already secured my place. I was a law firm partner. And I hadn't always played fair to get there. The money was good. My conscience? A little less so. Most Americans think homeownership is a fundamental right. The idea of losing property to the government seems impossible, but it happens every day. Eminent domain gives the government the power to take land, supposedly for public projects like roads, schools, and hospitals. On paper, homeowners are fairly compensated. In reality, if you believe the government plays fair, you're exactly the kind of person who loses everything. That's where lawyers like me come in. Eminent domain cases follow rigid procedures, and a skilled attorney knows how to exploit them. Most homeowners don't have legal representation, or they hire someone inexperienced. The key to winning in foreclosure law is simple. be the first name people see when they need help. I had an advantage, my last name. In law school, Landon came right before Landrew, which meant I spent 3 years seated next to James Landrew, a sharp, ambitious guy with deep political connections. He climbed the ranks fast, landing a role as legal counsel for the New York State Senate's Legislative Committee on Corporations and Associations. That committee oversaw eminent domain cases. And eminent domain? It wasn't about public projects anymore. It was a tool, a way for the powerful to take from the weak. These days, seized land doesn't go toward highways or hospitals. It gets handed to private developers. They call it redevelopment, but really, it's theft with paperwork. Think I'm exaggerating? Look at the New York Times building. The land it stands on, prime real estate in Midtown Manhattan, was taken under eminent domain. The deal reportedly saved the Times $80 million. Conveniently, they never thought to report that part. My job was to fight for my clients, or at least fight within the system's limits. I played the game well. I hired appraisers who knew exactly what numbers I needed. I made sure government officials handling property valuation had quiet side gigs with me. My clients got better deals than they ever would have on their own. But the real key to staying ahead, knowing what was coming before anyone else, that's where Jimmy came in. It started small. A casual heads up about a land grab along the Hudson. Then it became a pattern. Cash for information. Jimmy had a weakness. Gambling. Horses, slot machines, casinos on reservation land. He was always in debt. Not bribes, exactly. Just loans. Loans that were never paid back. My firm's partners were impressed by my ability to predict opportunities. My instincts made them rich, and for years, it worked smoothly. Nothing technically illegal, just a little inside knowledge, a little maneuvering. I told myself I was doing a public service, but once you cross a line, the next one is easier. And one night, I crossed another. I hacked Doris's phone. The spyware was advanced. Every call recorded, every text forwarded to my phone. I could even listen to live conversations in real time. In theory, nothing she said or did would be hidden from me. Reality, of course, was messier. The first day, she spent 5 hours on the phone. Sorting through the recordings was tedious. 45 minutes talking about a dress she saw at the mall. A full hour spent discussing a book with a friend. 3 weeks of listening to mundane conversations convinced me I was being ridiculous. I was ready to uninstall the software. And then the messages came. I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed. 3 notifications, one after another. Doris and I rarely texted. Neither of us were big on it. I checked. 3 intercepted texts. Remember, we only have 2 days. Mark, I miss you so much. When and where? Then a reply. Cooper at 12:30. Love you. It took a moment for my brain to catch up. Doris had a lunch date with someone named Mark. Someone she missed, someone she loved. Cooper's was a small, quiet restaurant just outside the city. The kind of place you pick when you don't want to be noticed. It was already past noon. I wouldn't make it in time, but I had another option. I could listen in. I tapped into the spyware, connected my iPad, and got into my car. At first, all I heard was street noise. Doris was still driving. Then, the muffled sounds of a restaurant. And then, a woman's voice, polite and professional. Good afternoon. Can I help you? A man responded curtly. I'm meeting someone. A brief pause, then the woman again, this time with recognition. Oh, here he is. There was a shuffle, the sound of bodies shifting, a hug. Maybe more. Doris sat down. They exchanged small talk. The man was smooth, confident. His voice was younger than I expected. Then, as I feared, he steered the conversation toward her. He flattered her, her hair, her dress, her beauty, her youth. His words came easily, seduction second nature to him, the kind of skill that made me want to hate him. Then their meals arrived, and the tone shifted. And then I heard him say my name. Your husband, that guy's a joke. Doris didn't object. He's old, stiff, boring, the man continued. He doesn't deserve you. This wasn't just a casual lunch. This was something else, something deeper, more dangerous. His voice dropped low and certain. I want you, Doris. We could have something real. She hesitated. I can't. I'm married. David and we're meant to grow old together. He scoffed. He already is old. You're still young, Doris. Why waste that? A long silence. Then softer, her voice wavered. If I can't leave him, then we'll have to be careful. Another pause. Then barely above a whisper, she admitted, I've never been with anyone but David. I love him, but you You make me feel different, like I need you to feel whole. You just need me to show you, he murmured. What you feel for him isn't love. It's obligation. She exhaled sharply. I just need time. For everyone's sake. His response was impatient. I've already been waiting. I know, she said quietly. But I have to do this the right way. Fine, he said. Just don't make me wait forever. I pulled into the parking lot of Cooper's, staying far enough back to go unnoticed. Doris's car was parked close to the entrance. Through my earpiece, their voices continued, low, intimate. She was making promises, saying she'd figure things out. Because in the end, I still love Dave, she murmured. We've been together for so long, I owe it to him to hold our family together. That's why I love you, he murmured. You feel things so deeply. Then I saw them. Doris looked stunning, elegant, put together, dressed far more carefully than she had been when she left the house that morning. And him? He was tall, athletic, smooth-skinned, with the deep complexion of polished mahogany. Handsome, maybe? Depending on who you asked, but young, no older than 30. When they parted, he pulled her close, his hands moving over her body, pressing against her. She let him for just a moment before stepping away. I expected rage, but jealousy didn't hit me the way I thought it would. Did I want to hurt him? Of course, but I'd need a bat and an element of surprise. Would that be fair? No. But there's nothing fair about a man chasing another man's wife. I wasn't naive. He didn't love her. He wanted her. And when that novelty wore off, he'd move on. And something in me told me Doris knew that too. She wasn't blind to what was happening. She was making a choice. Not with him, with me. Did she really think I would stand for this? Our marriage was typical. Maybe 5% of men truly ran their households. The rest of us, we compromised, we adjusted, we made peace. I never won arguments with Doris. Even when I thought I hadn't. She got what she wanted, always. Zex was no different. She loved it, but it was always on her terms. I never had to beg. But when her interest started fading, I felt something closer to relief than frustration. Doris had this way of making her desires feel mutual, like they were our needs instead of just hers. She didn't fight. She wore me down. Still, she was an incredible wife, a devoted mother. She worked, studied, managed the house. I helped, but she was the lioness, the one who truly held it all together. And if she manipulated me, it wasn't malicious. It was just how she operated. I only resented it in rare moments, like when I realized how much she enjoyed having that power over me. Every married man with a shred of self-awareness knows his wife shapes him, nudges him, bends him to her will. It's just part of the dynamic. But Mark was different. I understood why she was drawn to him. He was fresh, forbidden, a reminder that life wasn't predictable, that she could still surprise herself. And yes, the fact that he was black played a role, the novelty of it, the excitement, but it wouldn't last. Mark was the first, but he wouldn't be the last. That thought unsettled me more than anything, not because of him, but because I knew if Doris wanted to make me into the kind of husband who tolerated this, she could. And what were my options? Stay or leave? Leaving wasn't simple. We had built a life together, raised children, been through too much, and I hated to admit it, but I needed her. After so many years, I didn't know how to not have Doris in my life. That night, I forced myself to act normal, but Doris saw right through me. She frowned. What's wrong, Dave? I shook my head. Nothing, just work. Long day. She studied me for a moment, unconvinced. You've been overdoing it, she said gently. You should slow down. Take better care of yourself. Maybe join a gym. I stared at her. I had joined a gym. A year ago. Every morning before she woke up, I left for training. I dropped 13 of the 18 pounds I'd gained over the years. I had a personal trainer. I had committed to change. Her attraction to Mark had nothing to do with me being out of shape. It was how she saw me. I was a worn-in, comfortable pair of slippers. Mark? He was the sleek new heels she wanted to try, but in the end, she'd still wear the slippers, even if she didn't appreciate them anymore. I didn't take it personally. Deep down, I knew Doris had decisions to make. The next day, I got an unexpected surprise, a flagged message from the spyware, a phone call I almost ignored. But curiosity won. I tapped in just as Doris answered. Hi, Mom, she said. I wanted to check about Thanksgiving. Will you be bringing the bourbon sweet potatoes and broccoli salad? Her mother's voice was warm but direct. Of course, sweetheart, but tell me, how was lunch with Mark? Doris hesitated. Oh, Mom, he's... Amazing, but he wants more, and I can't. Why not? Because I'm married. I chose David. A sigh. Then her mother's voice turned sharper. You've given him everything. And what has he given you? You had opportunities to fix that years ago. You've lost your leverage. The kids are grown. You can't use them anymore. I would never do that, Doris said firmly. I may be a bad wife, but I won't be a bad mother. Nonsense. You've been an excellent wife. Has David ever once complained? No. You built a perfect home, raised two smart daughters, and you out-earned him. You made his life easy. Doris's voice wavered. Yes, but this is cheating. Only if he doesn't agree, her mother countered. Listen, men and women aren't the same. You know how it works. Women peak later. Men's drive fades, but ours grows. We need variety. They just want release. You could satisfy multiple men while David's limited by his stamina. If he loves you, he'll understand. A long pause. Then Doris sighed. I don't know. David's sentimental. Do you really think he'd accept this? And if he doesn't? I don't want to lose him. You won't, her mother assured her. Look at your father. He's no genius, but I've had other men for nearly 30 years. He adjusted. David will too. Agnes made sure of that when she pushed him to marry you. Let me talk to her. She understands him better than anyone. Then after a few more pleasantries, the call ended. I sat there in silence, disbelief tightening in my chest. Forced me to marry Doris? A sick feeling crawled up my spine. I had always suspected something, but I had never let myself accept it as truth. And now, listening to Doris's phone had confirmed more than I was prepared to handle. Hearing the unfiltered thoughts of the people around you is like staring into a mirror that strips away every comforting illusion. And what I saw staring back at me wasn't much. For days, I expected something to shift. Some confrontation, some revelation, but nothing happened. Then, another call came through, this time from Beth. Hey Mom, Pat and I are getting in late Tuesday for Thanksgiving, but we'll have to head back Saturday. We have plans with some football players after their game on Sunday. Oh, all right, Doris replied. I'll let your dad know. But isn't Pat still seeing that swimmer, Rick? She is, Beth said, laughing. But he just has to deal with it. Doris sighed. I guess times have changed if men are just okay with their girlfriends dating other people. Oh, Mom, don't be so old-fashioned. But while we're on the subject, how's it going with Mark? No, absolutely not. I'm married to your father, Doris said firmly. Beth chuckled. Come on, Mom. Dad's an old man. You're still young. You can't let some outdated ideas hold you back from having a little fun. He'll understand. He loves you. It's not like he has a choice. Who else would want him? Laughter rang through the phone, and then Patty's voice chimed in. Mom, do you want us to talk to Dad for you? We can explain, remind him of everything you've done for him. He adores you, and honestly, it's unfair for you to be tied down to just one man forever. Doris hesitated. I don't know. He never argues with me, but he's sensitive. When he was younger, he could have strayed, but he never did. I don't think he'd see it the way you two do. But he loves you, Beth pressed. If you tell him how much this means to you, just remind him he'll always come first. That's what I told Rick, Pat added, and he's fine with it. Well, your grandmother is already speaking with Grandma Langdon. I just hope your father understands that Mark isn't a replacement. What Mark and I have doesn't even come close to what your dad and I share. Hearing my daughters talk about me that way didn't just hurt, it devastated me. And the worst part? I should have taken comfort in the fact that they still believed Doris loved me. But I didn't. For days, I wrestled with it, unable to make sense of my own emotions. Then I took a hard look at myself. Sure, I had been working out. I was in better shape than I had been in years. But I had ignored the gray overtaking my hair, the outdated clothes I wore out of habit. Lawyers are supposed to look polished, not old. So I went to an upscale salon. The grays were toned down, my hair cut and styled properly. Doris didn't say a word. Next, I replaced my entire wardrobe in New York. Sharper suits, more modern fits. No, I wasn't 30 again, but I no longer looked like I was pushing past 50 either. Still, neither Doris nor my daughters seemed to notice. When the girls arrived home for Thanksgiving, I expected at least a passing remark. Nothing, just the same distant pecks on the cheek they'd given me for years. I'd become invisible in my own home, and the truth was, we barely had anything in common anymore. I knew more about them than they would ever know about me. I'd always been private, and because of that, They had built an entirely false version of who I was in their minds. Thanksgiving came, and with it, our extended family. 21 people crowded into our house. They arrived early for the parade, then settled in for football. The men took over the living room, the women took over the kitchen. I made a quick stop to check on my sister-in-law, Mary Ann, and Larry Jr.'s wife, Ann, who were watching the younger kids. Beth was helping. Then, I slipped away to my office, locked the door, and put in my headphones. Through Doris's phone, I tapped into the conversation unfolding in the kitchen. "He just went into his office and shut the door," Patty noted. My mother's voice cut in, sharp. "What's wrong with my son?" "What do you mean, Mom?" Doris asked. "Well, for starters, he's dressing differently, got his hair done, and unless I'm mistaken, he's got less gray." "I noticed something, but I couldn't put my finger on it," Doris admitted. "He's also lost weight," my sister Paula added. She hadn't seen me since last Christmas. "Maybe," my mother agreed. "I don't know," Doris said. "He's been off the past few weeks. I figured it was work stress." "You don't think he knows about Mark, do you?" my mother-in-law asked. A long silence. Then Doris spoke. "I don't see how. And even if he did, what would there be to know? I haven't actually done anything with Mark." "Maybe it's just a midlife crisis," my mother mused. "He is at that age," my mother-in-law agreed. "And with the girls moved out, maybe he's just feeling lost." "That would explain the sudden changes," Margaret Boswell chimed in. "Then we have to be careful," my mother warned. "He needs to be steered back to reality. If this is a midlife crisis, we handle it carefully." Doris hesitated. "Maybe I should put Mark aside for now." "Nonsense!" my mother snapped. "David just needs guidance. He needs to follow the program." "It won't help if you start second-guessing yourself," she added. Patty giggled. "So, should Mom just tell him she wants a lover?" "Not outright," my mother said. "We should have the men talk to him first. Let him hear it from his father and Larry. They've been through this. They're happy. There's no reason David can't be too." "But if he's feeling insecure, now isn't the time to throw a younger man in his face. We need to ease him into it." "You mean ease him into accepting another man in his wife's life?" Patty asked, barely suppressing laughter. "Of course not," my mother snapped. "Your father is a good man, a proud man, a devoted husband. If we handle this properly, he'll come around." "I have never neglected my husband," she added. "I've never taken a lover without making sure he was happy. He might have been on the sidelines, but in my heart, he was always first. Dave Sr. knows he's the love of my life. And now it's up to us. Doris, you lead the way, but we all have your back." A chorus of murmurs in agreement followed. As I sat there, listening to them dissect my life, I realized they weren't just discussing me. They were planning how to reshape me. In their minds, they weren't trying to convince me to accept an affair. No, that wasn't how they saw it. They were simply ensuring Doris had the freedom she deserved. She had sacrificed her youth, devoted herself to her family. Now that the kids were gone, wasn't it only fair that she reclaim a little happiness? My mother led the charge, speaking with the certainty of someone who had lived by these rules for decades. They spoke about me as if I were a stubborn child who needed gentle persuasion. I listened until I physically couldn't take it anymore. Tearing off my headphones, I left my office, walked straight out of the house, and kept walking. I wandered for miles, thoughts racing, anger simmering beneath my skin. By the time I returned, the house was still filled with laughter and conversation. No one had even noticed I'd been gone. Later that night, after the guests had left and the girls were upstairs, Doris finally asked what was wrong. "I don't know," I admitted. "It just feels like everything's changing. And maybe I'm not ready for it." She curled up beside me, wrapping herself around me like she always did. "No matter what happens, I will always love you. You've always been and will always be the most important person in my life." Once that would have reassured me. Now it just felt like a carefully placed weight on my conscience. She always knew how to make me feel guilty. The first Saturday in December, I went to a Giants game with my father and father-in-law. Larry got the tickets, my dad covered the limo and drinks. It was all part of the plan. After the usual small talk, they got to the real reason we were there. They tried to sell me on the idea, how a younger lover would make Doris happier, how real love meant letting her have what she needed. I let them talk. Then, as the game wound down, I finally spoke. "If I ever catch Doris with another man, our marriage is over. No exceptions." For 20 minutes, they argued. Called me immature, narrow-minded. I didn't budge. If she cheats, I leave. Who wants a wife who sleeps around? That silenced them for a moment. Then they excused themselves for a bathroom break. By the time they returned, the stadium was nearly empty. We rode home in silence. What I didn't know was that their little bathroom break included a phone call home. By the time we arrived, my mother and mother-in-law had already spoken to Doris. The wheels were already in motion. Less than a week later, they took me to a high-end gentleman's club. Dim lights, overpriced drinks, half-undressed women everywhere. And of course, the same tired argument about mature marriages. I sat there, sipping a soda, listening to their nonsense. Then I stood. I can't imagine trading my wife's loyalty for a lap dance. And with that, I left, took a cab home. They never brought it up again. As Christmas approached, I knew Doris and Mark had set a date. They had time off. I was supposed to be at the office, but they had overlooked one thing. They weren't the only ones keeping secrets. I wasn't a saint. For years, I had walked the fine line between ethical and profitable. Then, one day, I stepped over it. It started with land, worthless little parcels with barely any road access. Farmers, desperate for money, had sold off the roadside plots, leaving their main properties stranded. Then, a major retailer needed land for a warehouse near the thruway. They also needed a new highway entrance. And Jimmy, my well-placed friend, knew about it before the public did. While offering legal assistance to property owners, I spotted a for sale sign. 250 acres of neglected pasture, leftover land from an old dairy farm. On paper, worth maybe $1,500 an acre. But soon, it would be worth 20 times that. I drained my savings, emptied my 401k, left myself broke. I buried the purchase under a Wyoming shell corporation. Stuyvesant Lautide. No paper trail. I couldn't tell Doris where all our money had gone. So I lied. Blamed the market. The economy, tough competition. Any other wife might have asked questions, not Doris. We'll be fine, Davy, she said, brushing it off. As long as we're healthy and together, what's the difference? She cut back on spending, picked up extra work. She didn't buy herself a new dress for over a year. I promised I'd make it up to her. But somehow, that day never came. 2 years later, I sold the last acre. Final price? $22,000 per acre. I was rich. But by then, I had already started buying ahead of the state, always staying just outside their official acquisitions. People started asking questions. The real insiders, politicians, developers, didn't want an investigation. As long as I kept quiet, they left me alone. I never spent the money. I told myself it was for our future. Someday, I'd come up with a clean explanation. The last thing I wanted was for Doris to know what kind of man I really was. Christmas Eve was for extended family. Christmas Day was ours. As always, Doris and my mother had orchestrated everything. A massive turkey, my mother-in-law's famous lamb, my mom's signature baked ham. I was unloading the turkey from Doris's brand new Mercedes, a birthday gift from her parents, when my mother approached. David, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. When you're done, we need to talk. It wasn't a request. She led me into my father's office and patted the couch beside her. I sat down. She took my hands, squeezing them like she used to when I was a boy. You don't seem like yourself, she said gently. If something's wrong, the family is here for you. She searched my face, waiting for a confession. I didn't say a word. She wasn't stupid. She knew. Her voice softened. David, an honest man supports his wife's needs. A good husband makes sacrifices, just as Doris has done for you. She had finally realized I wasn't as clueless as they all thought I was. But instead of dropping their plan, she adjusted her approach. She framed it as my duty, my responsibility. In her mind, this wasn't about betrayal. This was about doing the right thing. She had completely misunderstood her son, and that was my fault. I had played the fool for so long that they truly believed it. In their minds, I was the oblivious husband, the man they could manipulate with appeals to love, loyalty, and responsibility. But they were wrong. I wasn't that man, not anymore. Technology had revealed their secrets, laying bare the truth about the people I thought I knew. I don't see how having a wife who sleeps around is something to be proud of, I said. She flinched, but didn't respond. Everything in life is transactional, I continued. We make agreements, not always about money. Some are spiritual. We take vows before God, asking for his blessing. We may stumble, but at least we try. I met her gaze, holding it. Otherwise, a woman might end up tucking her child into bed with lips still warm from betraying her husband. She went rigid. Whatever response she had prepared vanished. Shock, shame, anger, and finally, pain. Her voice was barely a whisper. "David, what did you just say?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "The kissing your children after cheating on their father is disgusting." Her hands slipped from mine. She shot to her feet, nearly stumbling as she bolted from the room. In the hallway, Doris was waiting. "Mom?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. "What happened?" This was planned. Maybe the entire family had been waiting for this confrontation. I slipped out the front door. I still had Doris's spare car keys. I got in and drove. I ended up at Hendrick Hudson Lookout, the place we used to call Lover's Walk when we were kids. Back in high school, it had taken me until senior year to work up the nerve to bring a girl here. And even then, I barely got past first base. I was never the type to charm my way into a woman's arms. By the time I was 25 and fresh out of law school, everything had changed. Women looked at me differently, but by then I was already spoken for. Doris had me in her grip, and she wasn't letting go. When she wanted me, I was expected to be there. Now that she wanted someone else, I was expected to step aside. It was twisted logic, but it made perfect sense to her. Doris had shaped our life, our home, our children, our future. I wouldn't have built this without her. And now she wanted a thrill, a distraction. She wasn't denying me the same freedoms. She just didn't believe I had the capacity to take advantage of them. Because in her eyes, I was old and pathetic. My mother's intervention had been intended to reassure me, to show me I was loved and included. But their kindness only confirmed how they saw me. Weak. The truth, I had seen this coming. I had once been naive, but I didn't stay that way. I had learned how to play the game. I had watched how it worked and adapted. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to win. Not for money, not for power. Because losing to Doris meant losing everything. And I had been losing to Doris for 20 years. I parked the car, pulled out my iPad, and accessed the spyware. A voice came through. Beth's. "He's gone, and Mom's car is missing. If we're lucky, he won't come back," Anne added. I had always known Anne never liked me, but now she finally had an excuse. Anne was trouble, husky-voiced, flirtatious, the kind of woman who turned men into idiots. Larry Jr. wasn't smart, but he had status and money. Anne had secured her place with him. They had a 5-year-old son with blonde hair and blue eyes, just like his supposed father. I'd always wondered. Now, as I listened, my mother laid out her plan. "My son is stubborn," she said. "He practically accused me of betraying him." "That doesn't sound like David," my mother-in-law said. "He's too good a man for that." "He knows too much," my mother replied. "The men must have slipped up." Doris's voice cut in, tense. "So what do we do? I don't want to lose my husband. We have to be smart. If he won't agree willingly, we'll need to convince him." My sister chimed in. "We shouldn't underestimate my brother. He was always calculating." She was talking about the poker game. As a teenager, I had figured out that our Uncle Jack was a cheat. Everyone knew, but no one called him out. We only played for pennies. Still, I hated being manipulated. So I studied his methods. For weeks, I let him think he was winning. And for weeks, he lost. He couldn't accuse me. Doing so would expose his own tricks. Eventually, the poker game stopped, and Uncle Jack never spoke to me again. "Yes, but David has a weakness," my mother said. Then she laid out her strategy. Booze. I rarely drank, a few too many, and I was out cold. At the New Year's Eve party, they would keep my glass full. Meanwhile, Anne would play her role, flirting, making suggestions, leading me toward what they needed to happen. Once I was drunk enough, they'd take me upstairs, strip me down, and put me in bed with another woman. They'd take photos. By morning, I'd wake up, confused, hungover, with proof that I had been unfaithful. With that kind of leverage, what could I say? I'd have no choice but to accept Doris's new arrangement. Of course, that didn't mean I would be allowed the same freedom. This wasn't about fairness. This was about control. Doris wanted her freedom. I was supposed to accept it. The problem? Anne didn't want to go through with it. "Do I really have to sleep with him?" she asked, her voice dripping with disgust. "You don't have to do anything," my mother assured her. "Just get him in bed, undressed, and let the pictures do the rest." But even that was too much for Anne. So they chose someone else. My brother Samuel's wife, Elaine, timid, quiet Elaine, newly married, pregnant. She agreed because she wanted to fit in. She was perfect. She wouldn't argue. She wouldn't make it difficult. She would be the perfect witness, innocent, unquestionable. Sitting in Doris's luxury car, I stared out over the dark rolling hills of the Catskills, the same misty mountains that had inspired Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle. The fog drifted across the valley below, and the Hudson shimmered under the moonlight, a perfect place for an old legend, but not the place to listen to your marriage die. Then I heard Doris's voice. "We need to give David more time." A second voice responded, cautious. "What about Mark? Will he wait?" Doris hesitated. "Mark is worried. We're both off this week. He thinks it's the perfect time to, well, as he puts it, rent a room." A pause, then a sigh. "But I need my David," she admitted softly. "He is my first and true love." Then another voice, my mother's, cold, certain. "Our plan will work. It's harsh, but David deserves it." "I'll talk to him first," Doris said, "but I won't keep Mark waiting forever." And just like that, the conversation ended. I had no choice but to return to Christmas dinner. The atmosphere was cold, tense, except for Anne, who had clearly accepted her assignment: flirt with the aging husband they needed to manipulate. I barely had a chance to pick up my fork before Doris reached for my hand. "Come with me," she said. I glanced at my plate. "What about dinner?" "We're not staying," she replied. "We need to talk." "Is there anything left to say?" "Yes," she insisted. But instead of talking, she drove us straight to the Hilton. She had booked a room. A chilled bottle of White Star champagne sat waiting on the table. I exhaled sharply. "You remembered." "How could I forget?" she murmured. "It was my first time." "This is the last time," I said. She shook her head. "No, not if we can help it." She kissed me, slow, deliberate, insistent, and as always, it led to the bed. Afterward, she curled against me, whispering the same words she always did. "I love you. I always will. You're my forever. No one else will ever take your place." I exhaled, staring at the ceiling. Love? Maybe, but use? Definitely. And is there really a difference? She lifted her head, eyes searching mine. "Of course there is," she insisted. "That's why I want us to have freedom, because I love you." I shook my head. "A caged bird stays because it has to. Don't open the door and expect it to stay." She frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means I don't believe you." Her grip tightened around my hand. "No," she said, almost desperate now. "Believe me, I only love you." She still didn't understand. "Don't let pride ruin us," she pleaded. "It's just physical. It doesn't mean anything." I met her gaze, unwavering. "Doris, you're making an argument you can't win. Just be happy with what we have." I pulled her close, though I already knew this was the end. For nearly 20 years, I had let her believe the lie she told herself. She sighed, pressing her face into my shoulder. "Oh, Dave, trust me." I whispered my final answer. "No, Doris, believe me, I will never accept what you're offering." And with that, I ended the conversation. By Wednesday, she had dinner plans with Mark. I listened just long enough to confirm what I already knew. No hesitation. No second thoughts. They had done it. And I simply didn't exist. New Year's Eve, I started the night at Irish Fog, an old haunt. Called up a few old friends, left my family off the invite list, but I kept my head clear. At 8, I arrived at Larry Jr. Fallis' house, reeking of whiskey and smoke. Let them believe I was already gone. As expected, the drinks started flowing. Anne dragged me onto the dance floor, pressing close, playing her role. I let her, played along. By midnight, they decided I was ready. Anne and Elaine each took a hand, leading me upstairs. I let them. They pulled me into a guest room, pushed me onto the bed. "Undress him while I get ready," Anne instructed. "Then we'll take the pictures." Elaine hesitated, fingers trembling against my shirt. "You know, he's actually not that out of shape," she murmured. "Doesn't matter. Just get his pants off," Anne snapped, slipping out of her dress. Elaine reached for my belt. That's when I spoke. "I don't think I want you to do that. Unless Anne is actually willing to sleep with this old, not-so-fat man." Elaine recoiled as if she'd been burned. "Crap, crap, crap," Anne muttered. I sat up, adjusting my shirt. "My sister warned you," I said calmly. "But does anyone in this family ever listen?" Anne's face contorted. I stood, buttoned my cuffs, and smoothed out my jacket. "Now," I said, "go downstairs and send up the woman who calls herself my wife." They scrambled from the room. I listened to the chaos below. Rushed whispers, panicked shuffling. I didn't bother eavesdropping. That part of the game was over. Minutes later, Doris appeared in the doorway. "You wanted to see me?" Her voice was small. Yes, I said. Come in, sit down. She stepped inside, her face blotchy from crying. Her nose ran, and she sniffled, pathetic and desperate. She wasn't sorry. She was sorry she got caught. What do you regret, Doris? I asked. Wanting another man? Or being in his bed last Wednesday? She gasped, panic flashing in her eyes. No, David, please. I love you. It didn't mean anything. You have to believe me. I know you love me, and I know you'll forgive me. She really thought that. She mistook my calmness for weakness. I met her gaze, steady and unwavering. No, Doris, I don't. Her face twisted with desperation. David, please, let's just forget this. I cut her off with a light, almost casual tone. Oh, I forgive you, Doris. Hope flickered in her eyes. There's just one problem, I continued. Her lips parted. What does that mean? I didn't hesitate. It means I don't love you, Doris. I never have, and I never will. She sucked in a sharp breath. That's not true, she whispered. You're just angry. I laughed, low and quiet. Do I seem angry? She blinked rapidly as if trying to rewrite reality, to make this moment something it wasn't. I spent 19 years in this marriage, I said. It wasn't bad. A gilded cage, maybe? But now, the door is open and I'm walking out, gratefully. She grabbed my arm. David, stop! You're not leaving me over this. Oh, I am, I said. You wanted an open marriage? I'm giving you the most open marriage possible, one without a husband. I turned toward the door. Her voice sharpened. What will you tell our daughters? I paused. Nothing, I said. Goodbye is all I have for them, and for you. She inhaled sharply. You don't mean that, I shrugged. I'd like to believe they aren't mine, I said. But considering who they are and who my mother is, I have no doubt. I stopped. That wasn't true. My real daughters, the little ones, would always be mine. The ones who sat on my lap, eyes wide as I read, Make Way for Ducklings. The ones who clutched my hand, whispering, Do you think the ducklings will cross the road? They never grew up, I murmured. They're still waiting for the ducklings. And with that, I walked out. Of course, my mother was waiting. She stood with my father, blocking the door. Where do you think you're going? She demanded. I smiled. Good question. I don't have an answer. I suppose to places I haven't seen in 20 years. Her expression twisted. So, you're running? Just because life didn't go your way? No, I said simply. I'm leaving to find life, the one I missed. You need us, David. Who will take care of you? My father sighed. Think about this, son. Doris has been good to you. We all know how much you need her. I met his eyes. Sorry, Dad, I said, smiling. But I already left. You just never noticed. His brows knitted. The door was unlocked the whole time. You just had to turn the handle. I kissed my mother's cheek. Then I walked past them. I left my wife. I left my daughters. I left my family. I was free, alone. But in truth, I had always been alone. Only now, I wouldn't be lonely for long, because the old man still had the one thing that mattered, money. And tonight, I was cashing out.